We have such a deep conditioning to live in this cocoon of thoughts, of very habitual thoughts. And the negativity bias that really comes from our fear, from our more primitive fear, ends up creating fear thoughts and fear beliefs that usually take the shape of something's wrong with me or something's wrong with you. That then leads to, that judgment then leads to distance and to hatred. It keeps our personal lives is such that we have a hard time having intimacy, real intimacy. And societally, it keeps us at war. So one of the real effects of going around in these thoughts, one master was asked to describe the world, and his description was lost in thought, that we spend most of our time. And if you look back through today and just say, what was today like? You'll notice that you're living a lot in a kind of inner dialogue, in a kind of virtual reality. So we spend a lot of time in it. And when we're in it, and especially when it's highlighted by a lot of judgment and angry or hateful thoughts, then that's the whole biochemical mix we're living in. So one of the things it does is it blocks reality. In other words, if you're entering your day or a situation or interaction with judgment or bias, it torques it. You can't see what's really there. There's, many of you might have seen the film Gorillas in the Midst. What I liked about it, this is a film that Diane Fossey is a field biologist, and she's following in the footsteps of George Shaler, who was the most famous primate biologist in the world. And he returned from the wilds with more intimate and compelling information about gorillas than anybody in past generations had done. And he knew all about, he found out about their tribal structure and their family life and their mating behaviors and all of this, and he attributed it to one simple thing. He didn't carry a gun. He engaged with a kind of respect that for these remarkable creatures, and they must have detected it because they let him close enough. But he didn't carry a gun. In contrast, most of us habitually carry a gun, whether or not we need it. We have a kind of pre-set in our minds ideas about who and how people are, and often have a slant that stops us from seeing who's really there. Sometime last year, I shared a story that from Maria Popova, who's some of you might have heard of. She does she puts out brain pickings, and they're brilliant, insightful. I highly recommend them if you haven't subscribed, just Google brain pickings. But anyway, Maria talks about an experience she had. It was a spring day and she's biking, and somebody's behind her biking, she can tell. And then that person overtakes her. And some of you might have had this experience of, on some level, it can be a perfect stranger, but all of a sudden there's competition. It happens when you're swimming, it happens when you're running, it happens when you're biking. Anyway, she felt that, and when he overtook her, she felt strangely defeated. And here's what she writes. But as he cruised past me, I realized the guy was on an electric bike. I felt both sort of a redemption and a great sense of injustice, unfair motorized advantage, very demoralizing to the honest muscle-powered peddler. But just as I was getting all self-righteously existential, I noticed something else. He had a restaurant's name on his back. He was a food delivery guy. He was rushing past me not because he was trying to slight me or because he had some unfair competitive advantage in life, but because this was his daily strife. This was how this immigrant made his living. My first response was to shame myself into gratitude for how fortunate I've been, because I too am an immigrant from a pretty poor country, and it's some miraculous confluence of choice and chance that has kept me from becoming a food delivery person on an electric bike in order to survive in New York City. And perhaps this guy had a more satisfying life than I do. Perhaps he had a good mother and goes home to love the love of his life and plays violin at night. I don't know, and I never will. But the point is that the second I begin comparing my pace to his, my life to his, I'm vacating my own experience of that spring day and ejecting myself into a sort of limbo of life that is neither mine nor his. Beautiful. So don't believe the thoughts that create separation. They lock us into a dividedness and a separateness. And in a deep way, they fuel more violence. They keep us in that cocoon. And this applies to thoughts about ourselves, as well as thoughts about others that we know, as well as thoughts about others that we don't know. The expression I love is real but not true. And what that means is the thoughts are really happening. They're real representations in our mind. We have real feelings, but they aren't the truth any more than your idea of an apple tree is the living, breathing tree. Example of real but not true. You could have the thought, when I'm angry and critical, my partner gets defensive and can't hear my message. Now, that's a real thought. It's not the living truth, but it's a useful thought. So that's why it's discrimination. But what if you have this thought? When I'm angry and critical, it proves that I'm a bad person, that I'll never change, and I'll always drive people away. Real but not true. It's not useful. It creates separation. So the criteria, all thoughts are real but not true, but some are worth using as a roadmap. If they create separation, anger, and more hatred, if they create division, don't believe them. Okay? Gandhi describes it this way. He says, our beliefs create our thoughts create our emotions create our behaviors create our character, and our character creates our destiny. So if you keep believing your thoughts that create separation, you are basically solidifying the prison walls, staying in the cocoon. So how we let go? How do we not believe our thoughts? The first step is to set your intention, to let it matter, to know that especially at this time in history, we can't afford going around in our personal life and our societal life making enemies of ourselves and each other. We can't afford it. Too much is at stake. My prayer to God every day, writes Elizabeth Lesser, is remove the veil so I might see what is really happening here and not be intoxicated by my stories and my fears. Remove the veil so I might see what is really happening here and not be intoxicated by my stories and my fears. That's Elizabeth Lesser. So when thoughts come up and we sense, oh, okay, I'm getting tight, we can ask ourselves, what am I believing? If you're suffering, you're believing something that's not true. If you have an argument against reality, you'll always lose. You know, your belief is just a belief. If you're believing it, there's going to be suffering. So what am I believing? What's it like to live in this belief? Is it possible that it's real but not true? Who might I be if I wasn't living inside this belief?